always tell CEOs, I'm like, don't forget the first part, the reality of what David was feeling. And in spite of that, he says, but I will trust you.
Trust you. Yeah.
So I always think sometimes we jump to, oh, just trust the Lord. Well, that statement is coming on the end of a statement that is very real to David's experience that I find that so many leaders experience.
Well, welcome again to another episode of Up Next. Today, I'm talking with the old friend, Dr. Rob McKenna, who we've had on before. I've gotten a chance to get to know you and watch the journey of wild leaders. And so, Rob, how are you today?
Tommy, I'm doing great. I am doing fantastic this morning. I've got my cup of coffee, which starts my morning off right. So I'm doing well.
Very good. Today, we're going to talk about this whole idea of trust, and especially the work that you're doing in the area of trust in your trust index. When I talk about trust, what's been that journey around this theme, this topic that you've been on here, Rob?
Oh man, Tommy, it has been a long journey. So, the original Wild Leaders was born years and years ago. And WILD, of course, stands for Whole and Intentional Leader Development. But the other part of that story for me is that every leader has a wild story. They have this surprising story that kind of stands out to them. And when I set out, I've always been about whole leader development, as you know, about the idea that we could actually tackle what so many people are saying is important, that the journey of a person and a leader is more complex than one variable, that it includes, not just their personality, not just their behavioral styles, not just the things that they're good at, that it, any of these different assessments. Is that the journey of a leader is a fairly complex one. It includes lots of different variables. And I'll tell you how I got to trust as I'm setting this up is, I set out to do that. I set out, when I was involved in different longitudinal studies in my 30s and seeing all these different variables, that we knew that there were certain fundamental psychological factors that had to be dealt with in the mind of a person or a leader, a person on a team or someone in a leadership role, if we were to accelerate their capacity, and also give them a sense of alignment and purpose and so on. And so I wanted to set out to build a process that would actually develop whole leaders, that would look at their competence, that would include conversations and some indices and some profiling around their personality, around their call and purpose, around whether or not they had support, whether or not what kind of experiences that they needed to have yet. So I set out on this journey. So our team starts doing this work over the years. And it was so interesting, Tommy, because, quite frankly, one of the things I've mentioned to you is that in my own developmental journey, going from being a business person and an academic and then full-time business person, but also a person who still has that researcher, that speaker, author part of me. What we realized was that if we were to understand how to elevate wild leaders to the next level of its impact, we needed to understand the impact we were having. And so what we did is we went out and we did a little bit of a study on all of the organizations we had partnered with to build whole leader and team capacity. And what we discovered, Tommy, that actually was a little bit of a surprise to me. Not a surprise, but it struck me that the number one thing that was increasing alongside performance and development was trust. And it was fascinating because, as I said, that's not what we set out to do. We didn't set out to build trust. We set out to develop whole leader and team capacity. And so it's something I had to begin to pay attention to and it made sense when you start to dig in, because I'm a person that believes that words matter. So when I even saw that trust was this main outcome, it caused me to dig deeply into this question of what is trust? And I don't mean like some pithy, quote that someone put out there. Like, what is it actually? What are the characteristics? What are the things that are included in it? And one of the things that I discovered that made sense given what we had been doing is that most people perceive trust as a feeling. You know what I mean? I either trust you or I don't. I feel like you are trustworthy.
Yeah.
And what we discovered, as we got into it, was this realization that trust has a chemistry. Trust has a makeup. There are things that are not labeled as trust, that are the variables that predict whether or not a person becomes trustworthy or not. And so it didn't surprise me that one of the things that, is a part of trust, and I can give you my definition in a moment, was because we were having people getting people into their whole developmental journey and then having them share that with each other, it made sense that what was increasing in them was trust. And the last thing I'll say from a faith perspective that's been really important is a part of that, because when you start to develop whole people, you realize there's an integration of your theology and your practice that comes up pretty quick, because you're talking about human beings. And so the things that are happening psychologically in a person are directly related to what's happening to them spiritually, and in their whole story. And so it's not just that trust has a chemistry, which we can talk about, but also it gets you into some biblical narratives around trust. Like I always come back to David in Psalm 13, and he
Yeah.
says over and over again, "How long, O Lord?
Mm-hmm.
How long? How long will this? How long will I have to wait for that?" Just over and over again. There's like 8 statements of how long.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how many of us have felt that? We've felt that sense of yearning, that sense of I'm not there yet, and my business isn't where I thought it would be. My impact isn't where I thought it would be,
Mhm.
and actually people are attacking me instead. Like I was hoping to do good things, and then at the very end of Psalm 13, he says this. He says, "But I will trust you, Lord."
Yeah, yeah.
And I always tell CEOs, I'm like, don't forget the first part, the reality of what David was feeling, and in spite of that, he says, "But I will trust you."
Trust you. Yeah, yeah.
So I always think sometimes we jump to, oh, just trust the Lord. Well, that statement is coming on the end of a statement that is very real to David's experience, that I find that so many leaders experience. And so, but even the trust that David was describing has a chemistry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you guys set out to create a measurement, a tool, and all of that stuff. How did you guys build that? Well, talk to me about that one.
Yeah. So, that I had already built, doing research and
Yeah,
assessment is critical. Like it is, some people think it's mechanical, or they're just kind of looking for the right score. And so much of what assessment isn't just the right score or like getting it right, but it's about the kinds of questions that assessment brings up developmentally for a person. And so, as you know, I spent my career building a set of 10 developmental assessments that would provide some really critical profiles and indices and on personality, on developmental readiness, on all kinds of different things, on competence. So we build this system of tools called the Wild Trust Platform. And it's originally called the Wild Toolkit. So it's a set of 10
yeah,
developmental assessments that organizations have implemented in their system. So it takes that, how in a lot of cases we do development by, oh, let's do this book club, or let's use
yeah,
this one-off assessment. Let's just, and I developed this set of assessments, and then I'll get to how we
yeah,
develop the trust index. Is that it's kind of like this. When people want to get healthy, and let's say you go to the gym, all of us know that there are certain muscle body parts that we're all going to have to work.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And unless you're missing a limb, some people don't have pieces, certain body parts, or they can't use them because they've been injured. But there's certain body parts that we all have to work. We have to work the front of our legs, the back of our legs, the front of our arms, the back of our arms. We have to work our abdominals. We have to work. And in the same way, there are certain muscles that leaders and team members have to work. And but for when it comes, go back into the workout metaphor, is that when we're working out, we have different stories around which body parts we need to work more.
Correct. Yeah, yeah,
And so in the same way, while there are a general set of body parts that are, in terms of the psychology of a leader and a person on a team, that they have a nuanced story of which pieces they need to be working harder, where they need more development. And I say that because, so I developed this set of tools. And so when we developed that, we realized that trust was a big deal. We developed what's called the Wild Trust Index as an entryway into understanding which of those body parts you might need to work more often.
Hmm.
And when you get into the trust literature, what's interesting is that trust, when I said it has a chemistry, it occurs, and this is such fundamental psychology, Tommy, that most of us relate to, and in organizations, is that the layers of that chemistry include at least three layers. One is the personal level. So as I always describe, every change or intervention begins at the individual level. It starts with the one. So any organizational intervention is going to begin with an investment in the development as
Mm-hmm.
it relates to the job of the person. But here's what's fascinating, right? So that's the first layer is I've got to increase my trustworthiness by developing myself. Now, what happens at the next level, which is the team level, is now I'm bringing that awareness to the team level and saying, so now that all these things are happening within me, that if I bring that awareness and I begin to share it with my team, what is it that occurs when people are honest with each other about their development? Is they begin to trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
So we see an increasing. So then we assess trust, not just the personal level, but now at the team level.
Yeah.
And then also there's things happening at the organizational level, and we describe that as the shell. There are certain structural pieces that, when they are in place, reinforce trust increasing at the team level and the individual level. So the basics of the Wild Trust Index is that it assesses where you are in terms of your strength on different drivers at the personal level, the team level, and the organizational level. And what research has told us about what are those key drivers is what that thing assesses. But it also includes a few questions in each of those areas that are qualitative. So, because in every one of those areas where you're assessing yourself on those things, or assessing your team, or assessing your organization, there's a story. And one of the critical factors that we talk about wild leaders is that your attempts at building trust, even when you use that very simple assessment that takes like 10 minutes,
Yeah.
when you use that assessment, it will directly link to the strategic moment that you're experiencing as an organization. So one of the things we start off with is, what is your strategic moment? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And now let's assess trust.
Interesting. And how is that, like, when you've worked with organization, how does that look like with organization? Is it primarily for their team members, or, and here's what I'm thinking about is, how do
Yeah.
I implement what you're doing with all of our network of young Christian marketplace leaders in all of the world? We have Jakarta, Indonesia, we have Kuala Lumpur, we have Nairobi, all of that stuff, but we also have a staff that we work together. What would you do to really be able to apply this trust system into what we're doing at Resource Global then?
Yeah. So one piece of that is, so first of all, as I said, is identifying that strategic moment is such a critical factor. It's like, it's very difficult to do effective and engaging development work. And I mean development of people,
People, yeah,
if they don't have a line of sight to what it is they're trying to accomplish.
yeah,
So whether it's an individual in a job or a CEO of a business who is helping them identify what is your strategic moment. Now, once we have that, actually the trust index asks those questions. Now it's as simple as thinking about, so we've identified that moment. So who are the people in the organization where it's most important for them to have a voice into this trust conversation? So then, and it depends. In some cases, we got organizations right now, because we're in a season right now of doing over and over again these feedback sessions on their Wild Trust Index scores. We provide what's called a net trust score,
okay,
an overall score, and then a score at those three levels: the personal level, the team level, and the organizational level. And I'm telling you, Tommy, the feedback is not only incredible, it is also actionable, because it
oh,
gives an organization a sense of where they need to be working certain muscle groups to increase that trust. And so we begin by assessing trust. But wild leaders, I never wanted to be simply in the assessment place. And by the way, assessment matters. As soon as you offer your people an opportunity to assess themselves on these 33 drivers, the intervention has begun.
mm,
Because even in the question process, they're going to be like, "Oh, are my team members reliable? Let's think about that. Let me think. And do I understand my competence?" So even as they begin to assess and ask themselves questions, the intervention has begun. But I never wanted to be just about assessment or just about speaking about trust. I'm a guy that's like, I want to solve the problem. So what we do then is we figure out, depending upon that moment they're experiencing, is how do we implement what we call our Wild Trust platform, which is the different products and services and the way that we actually
yeah,
address those muscle groups, as a way to in the different needs at different moments. Now, everybody's going to have to work all the muscle groups, but
yeah,
there are certain ones that are going to require a little bit more work. And so it is so easy to implement. And then we typically will assess that use that wild trust index also at the end of the year to assess, so how are things moving and changing as a result of that. And we're about to publish in early 2025 our it's the state of trust benchmark study, which is going to be fascinating because, Tommy, there is some incredible data, things we're learning about trust, about that chemistry right now too.
Yeah, yeah. Any chance you could give me a little glimpse of some of the data that surprises you?
Yeah, well, first I want to make sure I answered your question so that people would
Yeah.
say, like, is it that easy to implement? Like, and it really is. It's and I would say even for a small organization, I always wanted to, one of the risks is when you want to serve everybody, but I wanted to create a process that could scale to a smaller organization so that
Yeah.
they could begin to build trust. And our platform does that. And the trust index, as long as you have 10 people, you can make that assessment and receive feedback. But I also wanted to be able to scale so that we could serve much larger organizations. So that's what we've been doing. And it really is, I'm telling you, you can measure trust and you can build trust. I had a CEO a couple weeks ago, then I'll give you some of those
Yeah.
insights and a
Yeah.
couple points of the data, who I spoke to a group of, I don't know, it was maybe 30 CEOs. And he came up to me in the parking lot. And Tommy, he was one of the toughest audiences. Those people who are looking at you like cross-eyed. And I was thinking, and he had the largest business of anyone in the room. And I thought, he is not getting this. He's not agreeing with me or whatever. And so he came up to me in the parking lot, though. It's funny how people's faces do not tell you what they're thinking, because he said, boy, it was great being with you today. It never occurred to me that I could measure trust. And that is so critical, Tommy, because you ask any CEO, what does trust have to do with the performance and well-being of the people in your organization in general right
Mhm.
now? They can all have that conversation, because they know that if their people don't trust each other, it won't matter how good your operational system is. It
Yeah. Yeah.
won't matter. And the operational system will play a role in increasing trust. So, um, back to some of the findings. One of the things that has struck me, oh man, when I saw the data, it was really struck me, is that we put organizations, we show them where they fit into a quadrant. It's in one of four quadrants, and it's, you imagine this. Imagine on a y-axis you have organizational trust. So
Mhm.
the extent to which people believe that they trust their organization, they feel like their customers or their stakeholders trust their organization. The organization has clarity of mission, knows where it's going. So that's one possible avenue of trust. I mentioned that, organizational trust. Then imagine on the x-axis you have team trust. And so you have, if you're high on team trust, it means that team members within individual teams trust each other. Okay, so ideally, right, you would have high organizational trust, sort of alignment with that larger
Yep.
mission, which we call
Yep.
the shell of trust. It's like an egg. A high organizational trust would be, people see the organization, they trust the organization. We call that the shell of trust. But that also can be like an egg. If you were just high on that, then the insides can be a little messy. Now
Hmm.
on the other axis, now imagine you got high team trust and low organizational trust. And that's where within teams there's trust, like people that are in the foxhole with you, but they don't necessarily feel that alignment and that trust with the larger organization. We call that islands of trust. Can you imagine that? So within. Now the high category is what we describe as the stronghold. This would be a place. This is a place you want to be, where people trust the organization, they trust their team members. The low category we describe as the jungle of trust. And here's where the first surprising piece of data was. 52% of people are living and working within the jungle.
Hmm.
And so far, it hasn't mattered whether they're faith-forward businesses or have a Christian CEO or not.
Yeah.
52%. And when I saw that data, these are human beings who are functioning within an organizational system where they don't trust the organization and
Yeah.
they don't trust their team members. And you imagine the impact on them on a daily basis.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine what it takes for them to even begin to perform. Imagine how many workarounds they have to do to get anything done, let alone the impact on their mental health and their well-being. So that was the first thing. Now, what I would say is that most of those who are in the jungle are right at the border. So with just doing a couple of things, these leaders can push their organizations into the stronghold.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one thing, and there's several others. But if you want to discuss that before I get
Yeah.
anywhere else, we can.
And Rob, do you find a lot of times when people see these results, 52% and all this stuff, are they open to making changes? Do they realize, oh my gosh, I see it, and let's figure out a way to make changes, or are they resistant to some of those things?
So I get a chance to go and be a fly on the wall, maybe speak a little bit when we do this feedback, when our team members do that. So sometimes I like to pop in and see it.
Yeah.
And Tommy, it is unbelievable how important measurement is regarding something like trust. Because I say that because to your question, I was with a CEO where her organization is in the jungle. And, I've done a lot of CEO feedback over the years, on data like this. And I think part of it's the design of the Wild Trust Index itself, because it has an appreciative aspect. So it does point out areas where you've got some issues, things to
Hmm.
work on and deal with. But it's phenomenal to me, the level of differentiation of the leaders we're working with, because she looked at that data and you know what she thought? Now keep in mind, her organization's in the jungle.
Yeah.
And we have them that map all over the place. So we share where are you in those four quadrants. And you know what she said at the end? She said, I feel hope. I feel hope. And the reason why she felt hope is because she saw a pathway, because she already had an idea that was occurring,
Got it.
that they were struggling with trust. They'd been through a transition. A lot of times that strategic moment is a leadership transition, or maybe it's an increase. It's an increase in the acceleration of growth, or it's a decrease, all those different moments, a succession planning moment, whatever. And she said it. She looked at that data and she said, I see hope. And what an encouragement to me, to say, what what a courageous leader to look at, because that would be difficult for me to look at that data.
Yeah.
But the thing is, even if people are in the stronghold, trust is something that's questioned all the time, by the way. So it's not trust. Sure, it gets broken in severe kinds of ways, but it's questioned daily in every organization. So the necessity for continuing to work on those drivers, like you can't stop going to the gym. But it's been phenomenal to see the leaders who have stepped up and said, okay, now I have hope.
Yeah. 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 For the other 48%, is there a pattern for those who have created successful organizations with high trust? Are you noticing a pattern that, hey, here's the type of personality, here's the persona, here's the attitude that they have in creating those high trustful organizations?
Great question. And I would say this, that many of the organizations who are using the Wild Trust Index are not previous partner organizations with wild leaders.
Mhm.
So certainly my hope going forward is that those places will begin to move, because it's what also I wanted to point out is we didn't set out to build trust and then try to work backwards and to figure out what the drivers are.
Mhm.
We were already doing the work and discovered that trust was the outcome.
Was the
So
outcome?
it gives us tremendous confidence in our platform of tools and that system of products, and the way that we partner with an organization of increasing trust is one thing. Um, I would say a couple of the things that are just important pieces of the puzzle. One is an intentional investment in developing your people systematically. And what
Hmm.
I mean by that is not like development that's kind of roll your eyes at whether I have a development plan or not, or that we've seen, or just sort of one-off approaches, but organizations that are as intentional about their investment in their people as they are about the operations of their organization. We describe that as as much of a focus on all the invisible factors as they are on the visible factors. And many organizations spend a lot of time on the resourcing, the operational systems, the products and services, and they already know that half of their problem is occurring within the mind and the heart of every person in their organization. The problem is that in most cases we have visible operational systems that are pretty clear, or we don't. That's why things like EOS have become really popular, because organizations don't have that and they know they have to have it. But they also need to be focusing on, we know there is a chemistry of people development that works.
Mhm.
And if we focus in on those factors and they begin to share it together, then it starts to increase trust. Because here's the other thing: what we're discovering in the initial findings of the study that we'll be publishing, and this is not a surprise, but it's something we have to pay attention to, is people struggle with being honest with each other. Do you know what I mean? They
Yeah.
struggle with being truthful with each other. They struggle with being vulnerable with each other. Why would they struggle with being vulnerable? Because by definition, vulnerability is an openness to being hurt. Like that's the definition of vulnerability. So if I share something, there's a possibility you'll hurt me with it. So this reality that we have to give people, and that's why we created a wild methodology for increasing that capacity to be truthful with each other. So for example, if you gain an understanding of your competence and some of your key competencies you've got to work on, the things you're good at,
Yeah.
and Tommy shares that with me, and we have an honest conversation about that, imagine how that affects every other decision we make regarding delegation,
Yeah.
regarding hiring, because now we know where we need some other competence. We need to fill in the
Correct.
gaps a bit.
Correct.
It affects so many things. So those organizations are making that kind of investment, not only in systematically investing in their people, but then also in creating ways for people to get more honest with each other and vulnerable with each other, which organizations, both faith-based, nonprofits, and businesses struggle with.
Interesting. So a lot of times, do you find companies are the most open to it and churches are the least resistant to it, more resistant to it? What are you seeing as you're working with all these different organizations, ministry, churches, all of that?
The thing I would say that business has, and I think churches have this too, but one of the things that business has, and people kind of look at me funny when I say this, but is that when people take a job, there is an assumption that I'm going to need to learn something.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like you're going to go do your job, but most people go into a job with an implicit assumption, I'm going to need to learn some new things. And I think because of that, sometimes the investment in learning can be a little bit easier at times. I would say one of the things, and this is an overstatement, but many Christian organizations, including churches, pride themselves on being grace-filled communities.
Yeah.
And grace is critical, right? I'm never downplaying that, but it has a paradoxical relationship sometimes to truth, because those organizations also have to be truth-filled communities. And one of the biggest challenges related to our definition of trust is the necessity for people to be able to be truthful with each other. And sometimes in those grace-filled communities, we hide behind certain secrets, things that we're thinking, or we talk behind each other's backs, as opposed to having healthy, direct conversations about what we're feeling, where we're competent, where we're going. And I'll tell you one other piece of this. I didn't mention this, but our definition of trust is like, let's say you and I work together. That trust is your belief in several different things. It's your belief in my integrity. In other words, will I do what I'm saying I'm going to do, and will I have your best interests at heart when I do that? It's also your belief in my ability. So can I do what you're
Hmm.
asking me to do? Can I do it is an important part of the trust equation, right? And then the next one is reliability. Will I do it consistently? And then the last part is strength. So it's not only am I able, but am I able to do it well? Or am I able to get better at it? And then finally, Tommy, is whether or not I'll tell you the truth if any of those things are lacking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see how like we take sort of sometimes I got to say this, an over spiritualized approach to something like trust. We realize it has a chemistry. And we experience this every day. If you're not able to do something and you don't know you are, or you're not increasing that capacity, then you don't do it. And then I don't trust you as much, or the same you would feel for me. And so
Yeah.
if we can increase those things and help people be truthful about them with each other, that's why we increase team trust that way.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I know we're running out of time. So here's one question that I thought of as soon as you were talking about is once a leader loses that trust and people just lost all trust in him, can he or she gain it back? And what do they need to do to rebuild and regain that trust back?
Okay, first thing is this is like I think people have a very fatalistic view of things like this. And the answer is yes. Here's the other reality, because people have very short memories. So people will move forward quickly if that leader can do some courageous things to begin to change themselves.
Mhm.
And I would say one of the things you've heard me talk about before is that one of the fundamental and important factors in us beginning to help an organization build trust is what I describe as the editability of the leader.
Mhm.
And so if that leader is willing to edit, and what I mean by that is willing to change, willing to have the backspace key hit on things that may even feel like they're a part of their character, if they're beginning to even use our process, because we talk about when people use the wild toolkit in their organization, this set of developmental assessments, we avoid working with an organization where the most senior leader isn't actually using the process. And so that willingness to edit, I mean, it has deep roots theologically and other things, you know, this, Tommy, like confession, even that redemptive capacity to forgive. And so when a leader turns that corner and says, here's the things I'm learning about myself, trust begins to be rebuilt very, very quickly.
Mhm.
But it has to start with the editability of that leader, that readiness to learn and to change and to grow along with their people.
Interesting. Yeah. Very good. Side
Yeah.
note, as soon as you said that, I was trying to figure out if Judas, who betrayed Jesus, never committed suicide and came back to the team and says, I am so sorry, I made a mistake. Would those guys have forgiven them? Side note, that was just
Yeah.
came to mind.
No,
Yeah.
we could have a conversation about Judas. I think about Judas a lot. So that's fascinating. You're not everybody does, but I'd love to talk to you about that later.
Rob, where can people find more information about what all the work that you guys are doing over at Wild Leaders?
Yeah, wildleaders.org. It's all there. If they want to understand about the foundation and the work we're doing there, or even people that say, I'm looking for a place where my resources could connect with a mission like this to develop
Yeah,
whole leader capacity and hold trust, that's the wildfoundation.org. And send an email to contact@wildleaders.org. Contact@wildleaders.org. And if we can't help you, we will find someone who can. But I'd be excited to be able to partner with organizations, Tommy, in your network and our shared ecosystem. So grateful for this.
you got it. Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tommy.
See you soon.